Okay, which choice most logically completes the text? Well, let's look at the text. In a 2013 study, Agnes, Jose, and Manuel compared the feeding behaviors of wild lions in Tanzania's national park with those of captive lions in Spain's reserve. All right, so we have wild lions and we have captive lions that we're comparing. Okay. The researchers noted that previous studies focused on other carnivores have shown that providing animals with food at regular intervals, so regular intervals, as is common in captive settings. So when it's a captive setting, it's regular intervals, may inadvertently facilitate the development of novel stereotypic, i.e., purposefully repetitive. So that gets a yellow highlight as well. Behaviors by reducing the need for a high degree of cognitive engagement with the environment. The researchers were therefore not surprised to find that. Okay, so when lions are in captive settings, it's the case that they engage in purposefully repetitive behaviors. And the reason for that apparently is because there's less need for cognitive engagement with the environment. Okay, so there's less need for cognitive engagement with the environment. So, therefore, when cognitive engagement goes down, repetitive behaviors goes up. Okay, that's the way to think about that. So let's take a look. Which choice most logically completes the text? So once again, the researchers were not surprised, therefore, to find that bones from carcasses provided to captive lions showed signs of extensive gnawing beyond the point of nutrient extraction, whereas bones from prey hunted by wild lions did not. That definitely seems like the answer. We have excessive gnawing, you know, beyond the point of nutrient extraction. So I would say that that is a purposefully repetitive behavior, therefore, whereas bones from prey hunted by wild lions did not. So, yeah, so apparently the wild lions didn't have those repetitive behaviors because they had to cognitively engage with the environment more. So perhaps we could say that when cognitive engagement goes up, repetitive behaviors goes down. Okay, so we could think of it that way as well. So answer choice A is looking really good. Let's look at answer choice B. During feeding episodes, captive male lions showed more aggression than did wild male lions, whereas female. Okay, so they're comparing male and female, which is irrelevant. They're also talking about aggression, which is irrelevant to this as far as I could tell. So that is gone. Looking at answer choice C, when caretakers place food in boxes that were cognitively demanding, to open captive lines showed repeated behaviors. Okay, well, if it's cognitively demanding, that means cognitive engagement is going up. So therefore, repetitive behaviors should be going down. Um, so the fact is that with answer choice C, they say that cognitive demand went up and repetitive behaviors went up also. So that's a problem with this. Also, they say that repetitive behaviors occurred similar to wild lions, which doesn't make any sense because wild lions do not have repetitive behaviors. That's the whole point of this. All right. Um, Answer choice D, captive lions showed repetitive behavior of pacing in their enclosure as feeding times approached. Okay, well, that's repetitive behavior for captive lions, which makes sense. Whereas wild lions showed repetitive behavior of pacing before embarking on a hunt. So now, once again, they're talking about how wild lions um, also engaged in repetitive behavior. So once again, wild lions have to cognitively engage with the environment more. So we could say that wild lions maybe are represented down here. We could say wild lions are down here, captive lions are here. So wild lions have to cognitively engage with the environment more, which means that their repetitive behavior is going to go down. So that is why that answer is wrong. So we are most definitely looking at answer choice A. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the convention of standard English? Okay, so looking at these, we have sort of present tense, but also it's like they epitomize, so that's plural, right? So if the subject is plural, this verb would work, right? If you said they epitomize as opposed to he epitomize, right? So we're looking at present tense, also plural. This is past, um, and singular, right? You could say he has epitomized as opposed to they has epitomized. This right here is um, present tense for sure and singular. Okay, you wouldn't say they epitomizes, but you might say he epitomizes. This right here is past tense and singular. Okay. So based on just singular and plural, I'm thinking this one right here is the suspect because it's sort of the odd one out. So let's take a look. Such iconic French recipes described in surprisingly brief detail. All right, so such iconic French recipes. And this part is sort of non-essential, so we could almost ignore the green part and just think about the rest of the sentence, right? So, such iconic French recipes, blank, the Victorian. Okay, so recipes is plural. This is the only one that's plural, right? So it's got to be that. Now, when you're doing this, do you have to write all this down? No, but you should sort of, look these over and have some idea of what's going on. It is the case that plural and singular verbs come up quite a bit, I would say. So that's that one. Okay, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So looking at the answer choices, by the way, which is a good idea when you have the grammar type questions, you could actually dive right into the answer choices and get a sense of what's going on. This implies that it's kind of in the midst of a whole sentence here. This implies, of course, a sentence break. Now, that would imply that this thing that comes before the break is a full sentence, and this part that comes after the break is also a full sentence, okay? Now, if that's the case with this, then, you would have some like, because blah, 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 comma, and then the rest of the sentence, right? So just to kind of make that mental note, answer choice B is interesting. We could probably rule that out quickly if it turns out to not be the answer, actually. Answer choice C works, comma, it's because. This looks kind of wrong already, but you never know. You never know. So let's take a look. Let's put it this way. If what came before the comma is a full sentence, then this is wrong, okay? Because this is clearly sort of the start of a new sentence. Um, and you can't use a comma to separate two full sentences. Answer choice D. This would imply that what came before is indeed a full sentence because only a full sentence can come before a colon. And this would imply that this is a full, well-structured sentence. Also, um, preceding or following rather the colon. Um, it is the case that colons can be used to separate two complete sentences. Now, turns out that colons always demand that the first part be a full sentence, but what comes after a colon could be either a full sentence, a list, or some kind of clarifying statement. So let's take a look. So consider the mechanics of the pinhole camera. Light passes through a small hole, resulting blah, blah, blah. Okay. Array diagram reveals how this works. Okay. How this works. That is a full sentence right then and there. Okay. So already we know this one is gone. Okay. Because full sentence. And then answer choice C would say, it's because the whole small size restricts. So we're launching into a new sentence, and once again, a comma is not strong enough to separate two full sentences, so that's gone. Um, let's see, array diagram reveals how this works because let's check out answer choice A, because the whole small size restricts light to a single ray. All light passing through the hole can only arrive. Okay, so answer choice A is gone because answer choice A would suggest that the sentence would be structured thusly. Array diagram reveals how this works because the whole small size restricts light to a single ray. It should end there. So if answer choice A was true, then the sentence should end there. But it doesn't, right? All light passing through the hole can only arrive, right? So therefore, answer choice A is gone. It's starting to look like that would be a run-on sentence. So answer choice B, does that work? Array diagram reveals how this works, period, because the whole small size restricts light to a single ray, comma, all light, and that's what I had mentioned before, all light passing through the hole can only arrive at a single destination, eliminating diffraction. Yeah, answer choice B is looking really, really good right now. Let's look at answer choice D. Because once again, D would suggest that we have a full sentence to the left of the colon, but also it would suggest that this is a full sentence as well, right? A well-structured full sentence. But let's take a look at this situation over here and actually see if it's a full sentence. So imagine we instead had a colon and we said it's because. So it's because the hole small size restricts light to a single ray. All light passing through the hole can only arrive at a single destination. So that is incorrect because it sort of creates a fragment. So starting with it's because that would signal that an explanation is coming, but what follows is not structured properly there. Um, the sentence obviously becomes awkward when it's like that. And technically, there's a comma spliced, two clauses improperly joined by a comma here. So that is wrong. I think most students would recognize that that makes for a poorly structured sentence. So the answer choice B is the answer for that. Okay, so looking at the answer choices here, described comma from hair to grass to sculptures, describe comma from hair to grass to sculpture. So that dash right there, that either means that it's being used much like a colon would, where this isn't like a full sentence, and then colon either a list, a clarifier, or another full sentence would follow that. So we do need to be on the lookout for that. However, the dash also sort of sets aside non-essential information. So, for example, if there's sort of a dash lingering out front here, well, then this whole thing would be like the non-essential information. So we do need to look out for that. Looking at answer choice C, described dash from hair to grass to sculptures. Yeah, so once again, maybe there's a dash here, meaning this part would be non-essential information, or maybe there's a dash over here, which means that this part would be non-essential information. So we just have to look out for that. Answer choice D, described colon from hair to grass to sculptures. So already I'm starting to look at these two. If it's the case that this dash is acting like a colon, because sometimes dashes do act like colons, then it's the case that this would either be a full sentence, a clarifying statement, or a list. But the thing is that this would also be the exact same situation. So I am noticing that there's a comma here. There's not a comma here. That could be a difference. Okay, that could be a difference. But I'm going to say that answer choice C and D, I'm suspecting that they're wrong because they are sort of suggesting the same thing. So these are just some initial thought processes that I have when I look at the answer choices. So let's take a look. Um, In 1986, conceptual artist Sophie asked 23 people to describe their image of beauty in rich detail. Callie paired excerpts of these conversations with photographs, both of interviewees and the items they described, from hair to grass to sculptures. So this dash right here really seems, so this sentence starts here, by the way, really seems like it's setting us up for non-essential information. Okay. Meaning this next part is going to be non-essential information. So both of interviewees and the items they described, comma, from hair to grass to sculptures, another dash, to powerful effect in her exhibition. So if it's the case, so answer choice B is looking really good. If it's the case that it is indeed answer choice B, we should be able to take out the non-essential information and the sentence would still make sense. Let's actually take this out right here and just kind of read this. Callie paired excerpts of these conversations with photographs to powerful effect in her exhibition. Yeah, that does make sense. So, without question, answer choice B for that one. Okay, so looking at the answer choices here, Sarah is intending, Sarah, comma, intends, that feels wrong. Um, because it sounds like this is the subject of the statement. And this would be the verb of the statement, and you don't put a comma between the subject and the verb. So that's just at first glance, maybe there's some variation I'm not thinking of, but that does seem wrong. So let's see. Answer choice C, Sarah. Uh, right. It's almost as though this is the subject and this is about to be non-essential information, and that would require another comma over here to mark out the non-essential information. And this is perfectly fine, yeah. Although I will say this is present tense, this is present tense. These are sort of a little bit similar, right? So that makes, whenever there's like a high degree of similarity, I suspect that the answer choices are wrong. So let's take a look. American abstract artist Richard Serra blank his installations to make passers-by keenly aware of how one's movements are affected by the physical features of one's environment. Okay, so there's that comma that I was thinking about with when it comes to um, answer choice C, right? Because with answer choice C, I was thinking that this comma might be marking out non-essential information, which once again would require another comma over here. And I feel like that's this. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it to the test and um, we'll put the word Sarah in there, Sarah, but we're going to sort of ignore everything that follows until we get to that comma and see if the sentence still makes sense. Because once again, you should hypothetically be able to take out non-essential information and the sentence would make sense. Okay, American artist Richard Serra assembles large-scale steel plates into sculptures that dominate the outdoor spaces they occupy. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Therefore, this blue stuff is indeed non-essential. So, therefore, this comma does indeed mark out non-essential information. All right, now I'm just going to kind of read it though, so we can get the flow of the sentence. American artist Richard Serra intending his installations to make passersby keenly aware of how one's movements are affected by the physical features of one's environment, assembles large-scale steel plates and sculptures. Yeah. I mean, it's a long sentence, but it makes sense that answer choice C is the answer. Okay, so clearly by contrast means that we're sort of disagreeing or presenting something that's maybe the opposite of what was just spoken of. Nevertheless is similar. Nevertheless means, despite what we just said, something else is true. So in a sense, these are like disagreeing words that sort of suggest that what follows disagrees with what came before. So I'm going to say these are suspect to be wrong because they are kind of similar to each other. So just making that mental note. In fact means we're about to provide a great example of what we just said. We just said something over here, and in fact, here's a perfect example of what we just said. Okay. Over here, this is just to restate what you just said. So you just said something and then you're restating it, right? And you're restating sort of the exact thing that you just said, right? So you're not really going deeper with the information, but rather just repeating what you just said. So let's take a look. However, the differences between this edition and the other edition of this novel are extreme. So the differences are extreme, even by James's standards. Blank, some critics regard the two editions as two different novels together. So this is a stronger statement than just the fact that the differences between the first edition and this edition are extreme. Not only are they extreme, but some critics regard the two editions as completely different novels altogether. So that would be an example, and a very strong example of the general gist of what was said before. So that's going to be answer choice B. In other words, would suggest that um, that this is of the same level of intensity as what was said before. But once again, what was said before is that the differences were extreme, but this is saying that not only are they extreme, they're even more extreme than extreme. The differences between these two editions of the novel are so extreme that the novels might as well be different novels altogether. Okay, so I think my student watching understands that. Let's keep going. Okay, so the word however suggests a contrast between what was said before and what was said after. The word then suggests sort of a sequential transition, where one thing sort of is naturally followed by another thing. Let's see. Moreover, basically just adds information of the same kind of what came before. And of course, for example, would introduce a specific instance of a general idea, right? So let's take a look. In hindsight, given the ideas about the natural world circulating among British scientists in the 1800s, the theory of natural selection was an obvious next step. Okay, so the way scientists were talking back then, it was really only a matter of time before brought up the theory of natural selection. It may not have been a coincidence, blank, that these guys arrived at the concept independently. Okay, so then what that means is Darwin arrived at the concept of natural selection um, independently, and this other person arrived at the concept at the same time independently. Now, it would be a total coincidence if no one was talking about the natural world in that manner at the time. But since everybody was talking about the natural world in that manner, the fact that he came up with the theory of natural selection, and this person also came up with the theory of natural selection at the same time, it's not a coincidence. Okay. Indeed, contrary to the popular myth of the lone genius, theirs is not the first paradigm shifting theory to have emerged from multiple scholars working in parallel, right? Yeah, so this just kind of suggests that it's not a contrast, right? So definitely not a contrast. Um, let's see. Is this introducing information of the same kind? It may not have been a coincidence, moreover. Hmm. No, this is following on what was said before. So it's like everyone was talking about the natural world where it was only a matter of time before somebody brought up the theory of natural selection, and then, or we can say therefore, or it logically follows that it's not a coincidence that these two arrived at the concept independently. So that's answer choice B. Okay. This is sort of a sequential transition. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, afterward, obviously, would communicate the passage of time where this came before, this came after. In other words, once again, it's just sort of repeating what came before. And this part needs to be sort of literally the exact same statement as what came before. Additionally, obviously takes what came before and then adds to it, and however is a contrasting statement. So let's see. In a recent study, researchers examined the sleeping and waking habits of a group of dairy cows to determine if the cow's patterns of activity suggested that animals were diurnal, nocturnal, or this word, blank. The researchers studied whether the cows were most active in the daytime, and that's diurnal, nighttime, nocturnal, or at dawn and dusk, and that's the crepuscular. So this seems to be sort of clarifying what the red, blue, and yellow words mean. Um, so afterwards doesn't work because we're not talking about the passage of time. In other words, looks pretty good. We're not adding new information, we're clarifying and sort of defining the terms that were mentioned before. And it's most definitely not a contrast. So yeah, that leaves answer choice B. And I can see that because this is sort of restating what came before, only sort of making it clear what we even mean by those words. So hopefully that makes sense. So very often these synthesis questions are such that you can kind of get clear on what the goals are here and then not even read these and just kind of see which answer choices actually accomplish the goals mentioned here. So let's take a look. The student wants to indicate, the goal is to indicate the red-legged frogs FWS category. So apparently we have something called FWS, which I guess is the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then there's the so-called classification category. So let's see which answer choices seem like they might be accomplishing that goal. So, species on this list, which includes this frog, are classified as either endangered or threatened. Well, this isn't giving us the category, it's sort of giving us two categories. Now, I'm going to put a question mark next to that because, I just want to kind of see the other ones first. So, the California frog appears on this list of at-risk species. Well, that could work because maybe at risk is indeed a category. They do use the word appears, which makes it sound not very confident. So maybe that's a little suspect, I suppose. In a way, this is a little bit wishy-washy as well, which makes that a little bit suspect. But nonetheless, let's see. According to this, the California frog is in the endangered category, in danger of extinction throughout most or all of its range. Well, I don't really know what that means, but this looks pretty good. Um, Endangered category, in danger of extinction. That really seems to accomplish the goal. Looking at answer choice D, likely to soon become endangered. The California frog is classified as threatened. Okay, so it is actually telling us what classification it is. It's threatened, right? Um, so this could possibly work. So this is going to be one of those cases where, unfortunately, we're going to have to begrudgingly look at the notes here and actually see, well, what is the category? You know, Wildlife Service keeps a list of all at-risk species. Species on the list are classified as either endangered or threatened. Okay, well, we need to know whether or not it's endangered or threatened. So this is gone. Species that is in danger of extinction throughout most or all of its range is classified as endangered. A species that is likely to soon become endangered is classified as threatened. Okay, so if you're about to become endangered, we call that threatened. The red frog is likely soon to be endangered. So that means it should be classified as threatened. Okay, so it's soon to be endangered, which means that it's threatened. That's what this bullet point says. So that is the answer. It's soon to be endangered, and therefore it's classified as threatened. So yes, we did have to dive into the notes and see what the specific correct classification was. Okay, student wants to make a generalization about the materials used in Dow replicas. All right, so the goal is to make a generalization about the materials used in Dow replicas. Okay, ignoring this for now, looking here. A traditional material that was used to stitch together the hulls of ancient dhows. Coconut palm fiber rope is still used by shipbuilders. So this is talking about ancient dhows, but we are interested in Dow replicas, right? And we want to make a generalization about the materials used. So looking at, so this is gone, right? That's clearly wrong. Um, the ancient Arab dhow was a sailing vessel used primarily for trade. Okay, irrelevant. Also, they're talking about ancient. We don't want ancient anyway. Answer choice C, although most materials used in dhow replicas. Okay, well, that's good, right? Dhow replicas. I like that word. Mhm. Although most materials are traditional, some modern materials are used. I'm feeling pretty good about that because they're almost definitely talking about the materials. So, although most materials used are traditional, some of them, some modern materials are also used. So, I feel like that is a nice generalization about the materials used in Dow replicas. So, I'm feeling pretty good about that one. I'm going to put a smiley face there. Contemporary shipbuilders in Oman build replicas of the Tao, which was an ancient sailing vessel with a stitched hull. Okay, so that's not really making a generalization about the replicas, right? Maybe it's talking about the materials used um, for the real ancient sailing vessel, but it's not mentioning materials used for the replicas, so that's gone. Yeah, definitely answer choice C. Answer choice C is perfect.